After 22 days on the ocean, we arrived at the port town of Matadi, and we went through customs. We got a little pickup truck, and we started to drive inland. We wanted to get to what was called Leopoldville, now called Kinshasa, and in the middle of the night, we came across this mud hole. Everyone was stuck. It was impossible to get through, and we spent our first night sitting in the truck. This is old world technology, remember? Inland, driving inland, we came to the Baluba people, and I'm going to give you a close-up shot of this because I want you to see the scarration on their bodies. That's put in with a flint, and then ashes are rubbed into that wound, and that's probably the only reason that they don't get infected, is that they use ashes. But if you think a tattoo hurts you, try one of these. Further on, we drove into the land of the Bachok people. These are Bachok chiefs. They're small people, not a real large body folks. And this is basically how they live in houses like this. The missionary homes were considerably different. The houses we lived in had tin roof, and the one that John and I lived in had a garage attached to it where we could do mechanical work on cars. This was Victor Buck's house. And after he left, people thought, oh, here's a chance to get some building material. So it got torn down. That's our old Ford pickup truck. And I'll tell you, we drove that truck over some roads that after a day of driving, the roads were so washed out that your stomach hurt. You could hardly hold your stomach in anymore, and we didn't really have big stomachs back then. That's getting ready to pour foundation. We were making bricks and loading them in the pickup truck there. And then one of our finished products, one of the first things that I worked on that was finished was this little girl's dormitory.
Where did you get your cement? Was that an issue to get cement?
We had to bring that in by truck. Yeah. Now this is Sister Berta. Sister Berta was the only medical personnel that we had on the Kamayala station. She came from China. They were run out of China, and then she came to work here. And she was just a marvelous person. I really enjoyed her a lot. Unfortunately, she did have a heart attack while we were there, and so she had to leave. And then that's when Dr. Jim Diller came down to Kamayala Station, and that's when I became acquainted with Dr. Jim, and that's how I eventually ended up working for him in surgery and the medical work there. These are people waiting for help at a dispensary, looking for medicine and looking for help for their illnesses. This is just a little house where people stay in, waiting for treatment. This was another building that John and I worked on putting together. It ended up being a hospital for the Kamayala station. I was working at Kandala Station helping build this church when I was asked by Dr. Jim if I could come with him to the Nyanga Station and work as his surgical assistant. It's kind of interesting how I got that position. I was working on his car. And it was at that point when cars you could still work on them.
Yes.
You know, I mean, all you needed to get a motor running was you needed spark, fuel, and compression. If you had those three things, you could get about anything to run, you know? And I was working, putting new points and condenser and whatnot in his car, and he was watching me. And all of a sudden he said, you know, I could use those hands in surgery. And I really didn't know exactly what he meant. He said, I'm going to talk and see if I can get you to come to me and help us in surgery. I need an assistant to hand instruments, to suture, to help deliver babies, and whatever. So I'll show you a little bit of that work later on, but that was, ended up being part of my work, a good part. This is a schoolhouse. We monitored the schools there, built the blackboards for them and the school desks and whatnot. Each little child who went to school had to work 2 hours each day to, I guess that was sort of their pay for coming to school. They carried dirt and filled holes around the compound and helped maintain roads. I had a little choir there. I always enjoyed the music, and I particularly enjoyed the music of the native people. I was told not to go to their dances because what they were doing out there was sinful.
Yes.
Well, man, that's all a 22-year-old, 21-year-old needs to hear is their sin. So I headed out there as fast as I could. But I will say that on that issue, the missionaries were wrong. I did quite a study of their music and what they were dancing about. It's included in that book. Probably some of you have seen it. And things like they would sing, you're a pregnant woman, for example. They would say, you're as pretty as an egg. An egg was their symbol of how beautiful you could be. And if you were pregnant, that is as beautiful as a woman could possibly be. Now I know this looks like an easy thing to do, driving onto a ferry. We had to cross what were called bocks continuously on our drive inland, and you'd think, well, anybody could drive on there. But I'll tell you, when you drive onto a ferry, it's on 4 canoes. And so one side starts to go down, the other starts to go up, and you get on it. If you go too fast and stop too fast, you'll tip it over the other way. It has to be done very, very carefully. That was a particular vehicle you see there we used for many, many medical emergencies in the villages. When we cross the ferry, then there's no cable going across to pull you across. So you have, depending on the season, when it's rainy, it's treacherous traveling, and when the water is low, you have to drive your car through water to get to the sandbar so you can get on the box. But then you have to pull the box upstream until you think you're far enough upstream so that when you push out into the main part of the stream, you'll end up close to where you want to stop on the other side. Sometimes you land where you're supposed to, and sometimes you hit too hard and you bounce back out into the stream, and down you go, and you find yourself a mile downstream and you're pulling back up for another crack at it. One of the Belgians there put his truck right straight over the edge by coming in too fast. I think he was drunk. When we came with our large truck, we had to unload it, make a trip over, unload it, come back, pick up the truck, take it over. I mean, it took a while. Sometimes to cross a ferry, you could spend a full day. Right across the street from where we lived, there was an orphanage. And to this day, I'm not 100% convinced that an orphanage is a good idea there. These people had their own way of dealing. A mother would die in childbirth. Someone would step in from the family or the village and care for the children. But we had a missionary who decided to start this, and I've often wondered what happened to these little children when independence came. You know, what happened to them, and where did they go? Little Fuela on the right, his name means fish hook. He was, he was kind of like a little puppy. I'd get up in the morning, he's standing by the door. You know, he wants to talk, he wants to kick the ball around, he wants to have fun. But I just love these little guys. George on the left. George fell out of a palm tree and cut his stomach. We had to do some little suturing on him.
I assume that's you, right?
That's me, yeah, sorry about that, folks. That was me. 60 years changes things. No plastic toys for the kids to play with. They play with whatever they can find. This little young girl was responsible for that little baby and another orphan that she would bring to the dispensary for medication. And I mean, I don't think she's more than 5 or 6 years old or so. Now that's George climbing palm trees all the time. That's how he got hurt. It's a palm nut. This is their little cookhouse. And this is how they dig in to eat. Everybody eat out of one plate with your fingers. And the little guys, they never get much. And you can see how skinny they are. I decided that I wanted to just see what the women did in the course of a day, and so I asked their permission if I could just follow them out to work. So here we are headed out to the manioc fields. That's the manioc root. That is the staple of their diet. Something missing there. This lady is bringing home some wood. I'm going to back up and see if I can get that other picture. No, that's gone. Okay. That piece of wood there is heavier than you might think. In fact, as she bent down to pick it up, I said to her, wait, let me help you. I'll put it on your head for you, you know. I never agreed to carry it home because I knew that I never could do that. But I could barely lift it, and finally she said, no, no, step aside, let me do it. Even when you get older, like this lady probably in her 60s, still brings in a load of wood. This is cleaning the manioc root. They soak it in water, they clean it. They pound it in a mortar like this until it becomes flour. Cook it. Potatoes look about the size of our peanuts. Caterpillars. Flying ants as they come out of the ground. When certain seasons, the flying ants come shooting out of there. And people, you can be amazed at how fast they can put those things from the ground right into their mouth. And the wings come out the side of their mouth, and they live, well, I guess it's not live after they chew it. And grasshoppers, catching grasshoppers in season, which they use to supplement their diet. This little guy had a problem with running away. So his others figured this out to take care of that. And that's a mother bathing her little baby. I guess I got my own image in there in the shadow.
Is that a cast iron tub, or is that...
That wasn't one of these enamelware tubs?
Oh, enamelware.
It was an enamelware tub. I don't know.
Where they would have got it.
I think a missionary probably brought it over.
Okay.
Probably dropped it and broke it and gave it to them. Interesting picture here is that this woman has kept both of her babies. Usually, before the missionaries came and before we had hospitals, women would go out into the field to have their babies. They would go out with a hoe. In case the child is born dead, they would bury the child. If there were 2 children, they would choose one of the children and the other would be left to be buried. they had a superstition, a belief that if two babies were born, 2 men must have been involved with that woman. That changed. This woman had both her babies in our dispensary. Now the women still had time to look beautiful. This is the beginning of a mud hairdo, and this is the finished product here if it comes down. Isn't that cool? I mean, that almost is as good as some of these purple hair jobs you see now. I would mention that if you look at her baby, that is a look of a very healthy baby. Nice color, nice black, cheeks filled out nice. Where you see some children are very, very pale, distended stomachs. And the women still had time for dancing in the evening. They loved to dance. And it was real common to see a little baby on the hip of the mother while she's out dancing. The men now, what did the men do? Well, on the table out there you saw some of the points that they used for fishing and for hunting. The arrowhead points, they had a smelter. This man is from the leper colony, and he's making a bow for bow and arrow. That is a man shooting into the water for a fish, and if you notice the end of the tip of that arrow, you'll see that on my table out here. That's supposed to pierce through the water a certain way, and they were able to get the fish that way. They also did the hunting, and I have to say that these Congolese were much smarter about how they did fires than we are. They would light the grass plains on fire every year, and what you would get is a low-level fire. It did not burn up the big trees, and what happened, they also used that as a time to hunt. Animals would become confused by the flames. They would run away from the flames for a while, and then they would turn around and they'd come back through the fire. And then we would walk along behind when we did go hunting and try to see if we could shoot the animal when it came through. And they had little kabaji. I think I have a picture of them. Well, this is the flame kind of burning out at night. And that's a little kabaji after a hunt. But I'll tell you, those hunts were a bit on the scary side. Because some of the guns that these people had would shoot, and sometimes they wouldn't. Sometimes they'd backfire. Other people came with bows and arrows, and if an animal got through the line, they'd start turning this way and shooting. You could be directly in line of where they're shooting. So we just went on a couple of these. The men also are responsible for the building of the homes, the houses. The grass made out of bamboo leaves, and you'll see here on the table some of that cloth. I brought some of that cloth home that they're making on the left. That's the loom they're weaving it on. Now this, now we're getting into something different. This is what's called the keeper of the Mahamba. The Mahamba has to do with the native religious beliefs of the people. That was all done clandestinely, and if it hadn't been for my friend John Jansen, who is now his PhD in anthropology, just retired a year and a half ago from Kansas State University, as being interested in absolutely everything. He wrote his parents one time, he said, "I don't want to leave here without knowing who I've been amongst." And he asked questions, and we found out some things that John Jansen, the other John Jansen, and the missionary women had never ever seen before. They believed in a god. They called him Nzambi Galunga. Nzambi is God. Galunga meant far away God. And their statues of Nzambi Galunga had very, very long legs and just a tiny little body. He's too far away to talk to directly. So they had the Chapangu Chanjimu, or the field of the dead ancestors. Now, if I was going to get ready to go on a hunt, for example, I might come to this jawbone, and that would be, inside that jawbone would be the spirit of a man who was a very good hunter. And I would pray to that, and he then would pray to God, and I would have the possibility of a good hunt. Also, hidden away, where no one could find it, was this little place where they kept a bowl. Usually a bowl was in there with a number of different, I guess you'd call them artifacts or things that they had made. And in the event that someone died mysteriously or someone was hit by lightning or whatnot, the keeper of the Mahamba would come here and he would spread that on the ground, and then he could tell who had caused this atrocity to happen, to befall these people. And then they would do whatever they had to do to settle up. I have a drinking cup out here that you might want to look at, that they used if there was a murder in the village and they were trying to determine who had murdered whom. They would fill one cup with poison, and they would have 10 men, or 10 or 12 men sitting in a circle. Each would have a cup. The chief of the village would say to pass the cup to the left a certain number of times, pass it to the right, and then everybody drinks. The man who dies was the guilty part. This is a fetish to catch lightning and throw it to the ground before it has a chance to hurt anybody. There's a lot of lightning in the Congo. And it hit lots of places. I had a strike outside my house. I think it could have been 5 feet from my front porch. About jumped out of my skin. Now this is a mask used by the men during circumcision rites of the young boys. Now, the native African Bachok people used to do this rite when the boys were getting to the place where they were to become young men. Eventually, most of the circumcisions ended up being done by our doctors. A lot less infection and less trouble. Now this was what a lot of people would call a witch doctor, but I just called her she was a healer from the village. She happened to be from the village where the lepers lived. Now I'll grant you, she does not look too well off herself. But when all the African medical doctors, when the American medical doctors left, this is what was left. This is one of her patients. He has mumps, he has an umbilical tumor, and he's just been circumcised. She says, I'll put this white paste on their cheeks, and you watch. In 10 days, 12 days, the swelling will go away.
Yes.
Sure enough. Right. These women came to our hospital with these sick little children. Dr. Diller took one of the children. I took the other one to try to save their lives. Dr. Jim told me to try to start an IV. They were so dehydrated, that's the word I'm looking for. They're so dehydrated that I could not get the needle started in either one. I went back to Dr. Jim, I said, what do I do? He said, he'd already lost his had died. He said, take a teaspoon with a little bit of water and put just a few drops of water in the mouth of the child. I held the child in my arms, and I dropped a couple of drops of water into its mouth. And the water went to the back of its throat, and it didn't have enough strength to swallow. It got right in my arms. Dr. Jim told me later that if I had the child's head on the side, that maybe it could have worked the liquid back and swallowed when it had the strength to swallow. But I didn't know that. And he comforted me by saying he didn't think either one of these children had a chance to live. This woman walked in for miles and miles, and looks like she has tuberculosis, or what we used to call Slim's disease. You know, they discovered HIV out of Africa in 1959. Did you know that? And we kept seeing these cases of people wasting away, and we didn't know what it was. We called it Slim's disease. Her husband in the background did not want her to come in. He followed her in, he took her by the hand and took her back. I thought perhaps she had tuberculosis. This is a leper in the leper colony. We had numerous cases where we had to remove fingers and toes. You can see the nose eaten away on the woman on the left. That's a man fell into a fire, got gangrene in his arm, and we amputated his arm just above where you see that top cloth tied. And if you look on his hand, the hand that he's holding up, you'll see the length of his fingernails. Can you see that? The little white spots showing out there kind of shows how long he's suffered with this arm. He survived. Gangrenous infected hand, fell into a fire, we bandaged him up. This was interesting. A lady came in with a wrist and said, "Can you make my wrist go straight?" Sorry, too long that way. Couldn't help her.
What was the cause?
She just fell and broke her wrist. Yeah. And it had been that way for years and years and years. And then she heard that these doctors were miracle workers.
Did her fingers work though?
Yes, some, surprisingly so. This is the maternity ward at Nyanga Station where I spent the last months of my work. These women would wait here. They loved to come here because they would get blankets and they would get things for their children, for the babies. We had interesting deliveries here. One morning, early morning emergency, Dr. Jim and I got up and went to the hospital. We delivered a baby, a hydrocephalic baby. It was perfect from the neck down. Perfect little child. From the neck up, there was not a feature you could tell. No eyes, no mouth. There was a bone sticking out where the mouth should be. And the heart was beating. And Dr. Jim wrapped that little baby in one of our little layettes that we had there and set it on the counter and said to me, "Let's go have breakfast." When we came back, the baby had died. One of the things, that picture's not in there very good, but this was a Belongo man who ran a ferry service on the river below, and he had dropped the person's bicycle into the water, and they had killed him. And the Belgian government wanted to know what had caused his death. And so they told Dr. Jim and I to go out there, and they had dug him up already, and our job was to try to determine what had killed him. He'd only been in the ground 2 days and looked like this. This is the first time in my life I really started thinking seriously about cremation. This was the person who they thought had possibly clubbed him to death. Okay, now I'm going to just say a little bit about after a year of being out there, John Jansen and I decided that we didn't want to just come straight home when our 2 years was up. We decided we wanted to buy a car and travel across Africa, up into Egypt, across to the Holy Land, through Syria, through Turkey. We had these great big plans. And so we started looking for a car. And finally, we found this car in a little town of Kikwit when we went for groceries. A concrete wall had fallen on the front of it and knocked out the headlights, but we were able to repair the headlights, and we bought the car, and then we called and we wrote our parents and we told them what we wanted to do. They were so concerned about it that the Jansen family came all the way out here to Oregon to sit down and talk with my family. And this was really kind of interesting because my dad was an eternal optimist. Like I said, my mother was a worrier. So the Jansens and my mother got along really great. And my dad said, wow, I wish I could go. And so finally, after a long time, Harvey Driver, who was one of the heads of the Continental Mission and the board that sent us out, we wrote him a letter and we said, can we make this trip? And he wrote us back and he said, yes, you can make the trip if you take me along. And of course, he couldn't come, but we did get their permission, and away we went. And so now I'm going to just a very, very few pictures in Africa to show you our trip home, which was, I guess, 18,000 miles total, 25 different countries. In this car, which turned out to be magnificent, one flat tire. It's a French Citroën. Yeah. That's an anthill, and boy, I'll tell you, those ants in Congo, they're very interesting. I know I've got to hurry here. My time is almost up. I'll get through this really fast. The ants here had some kind of a communication system going that when you got in a line of them, they're halfway up your leg before the first one bites. And then they all bite at the same time. We camped, we were 3.5 months getting home. My wife is not in here, is she?
No, she's not.
No, she's not here. I gotta tell you something. I had a girlfriend at home before I left. And she told me that she would wait for me for 2 years. Well, when the 2 years was up, we decided to make this 3.5 month trip home. When I got home, she was married to another guy.
You got the better deal there.
I think I did. Thank you. Yeah, that's very true, Jerry. That was the tent we slept in practically every night when we didn't sleep in our car. Came through the jungles, and it was a lot different coming through 2 years after we had gone through the first time through the jungles. It looked like every vine that was hanging from the tree looked like a snake to me.
Yeah.
You know, but now it just seemed like that's a very nice road. We got into the land of the Watutsis in the eastern Congo, and from there, the land of the Pygmies. It's a pygmy mother. Is that out of focus?
Yeah.
A little bit.
Oh, it's not very good. Yeah. They were, for the most part, still in the food gathering stage. They would move from, if they were able to kill an elephant, for example, they would move around that and then, or kill a kabaji or anything they could get, they would move into that area, rebuild their little huts, and live there for a while. But they were starting to harvest some of their crops. I think this woman is carrying bananas. That's a heavy load. This is getting eastern Congo into the land of what's called the Ruwenzori Mountains. You who can read French, Rue à Sens Unique. Lundi, Mekvedi, Vandredi, you go one way, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, you go the other way. Sunday, you take your chance. And there were places there that were so narrow that if you would meet a car coming, you could have to back your car up for more than a mile. Again, a picture in the Ruwenzori Mountains. Well, that's John. Wonderful guy. Really, really love him. Met him after he only retired a year and a half ago, and we met in Freeman, South Dakota, and we decided to do a book. And we said, well, how are we going to do that book? And well, why don't we, we can't count on our memory so good anymore. How about we use the letters that we wrote home? And I said, my mother died young, and my dad remarried, and then they moved to a nursing home. I said, I have no idea where my letters would be. And I said, I'll go home and I'll look. And so I started searching for those letters, and I got in an old trunk that my mother had, and there in the bottom, every letter that I wrote home. Wow. In a shoebox.
Now, where did you get your fuel as you were doing this 3.5-month trip?
We stopped wherever we could, mission stations, any place we could buy fuel, we bought fuel. Our initial intention was to drive across the Sahara Desert, but my mother was very happy when we decided against that, and so were we, because you had to have 2 sets of sand tracks, each 15 feet long, because some of the sand you just sink right down into it, right up to your axles in your car. And you have to be able to work your way out of it. You had to have 5 gallons of drinking water per person, plus enough fuel to make it to the next fuel stop, double that amount of fuel. And the roads were covered oftentimes with sand, and you had to take a reading on your compass, and it would say go 87 kilometers till you come to another post, and then gives you another direction. We decided it wasn't worth it. Too dangerous. But these roads in Eastern Africa were fantastic. You had to be careful for the roadblocks.
Oh, that's a lot.
Can't afford to hit one of those. I ran over a pig one time in a village in the Congo, and it was just like hitting a rock. I can imagine what this would have been. I always enjoyed taking pictures of trees. I threw this one in because we're moving up into Tanganyika, and I think my last picture might be, no, not my last one, okay, 2 more.
That was a baobab tree, right?
No, acacia.
Pardon, I'm sorry.
Isn't it acacia?
Was that an acacia tree?
I don't know, Jerry. I really don't know. I don't know. We saw this village in Tanganyika, which now is, of course, Tanzania. And I was interested in this next picture particularly. It shows an Arab slave trader, and they've cut his beard off, and I didn't get enough to the left, or you would have seen a person behind him ready to cut his head off. My last picture, if it shows up, we'll see. Yeah, that's Mount Kilimanjaro. That's the snow-capped mountain on the equator. But I'll tell you, it does not have that much snow now. 60 years later. The snow is receding on the top of that. So that's my slide presentation. Gives you a little bit of what we saw and what we did. Hopefully, somebody asked me one time when I got home, they said, well, what do you think you were worth out there? What do you think you were worth? And I thought about it for a while, and my answer was, I think I was worth whatever I was worth. Because you just don't know. Jerry and Randy Friesen came to my farewell party when they were young boys before I left for Africa, and their father said to them, I hope someday you'll do something like Larry is doing. Both of them ended up in the Congo. So how do you know what you were worth? Lights.
Well, Larry, I just have a comment because when I get finished my medical training, when I finished my training, we wanted to go overseas and we applied to the mission board. It was 1964. And they said that, when we go to Congo, they said you can't go, it's just too crazy. The rebels were killing everybody.
Yeah.
And you talk about change of plans, and they called back a little later and said, well, we have a place in Taiwan. So,
Oh, yeah. I can understand that. It never was safe there, not really. You know, in Kamayala, we were close to the Angolan border. And when all of our missionaries got in that old carryall you saw going on that ferry and trying to make a run for it, they'd come across all of a sudden limbs in the middle of the road. They'd have to stop, and there would be people would take their spare tire, their tools, their clothing. They drove into Angola with nothing.
Yeah.
No clothes on their body. And the doctor in Eastern Africa, you know about this story about him, where he was trying to jump over a fence with John. Yeah, and got shot. He didn't quite make it over the fence. I mean, it's a violent thing. But you've got to remember that these people grew up with violence. That if you ever go to Brussels, Belgium, to the it's called the Grand Place, you'll see where some of the wealth ended up, and all those gold gilded buildings and everything else. But I mean, that country was so stripped of its resources, not taken all, but I mean, when you consider how those people were treated, it is, it's just incredible, you know, that they still had the will to live and put up with what they did. And when revenge came about, it did not surprise John or I at all. Not at all. We were starting to see it, even in our work crews and stuff. They were, after the big riots in Leopoldville, they came back and they wanted more money for their work. You know, they were starting to say, we deserve better. And the truth is, they did. They deserved much better than what they got. Thank you, folks, very much.
Yeah, before you go, can I ask Larry one thing?
Yes.
Tell us the story in Germany. At the end of your
Sure you
trip.
want to hear that?
I want to hear that story. John Snyder told me the story, but I want to hear it from you.
Okay, I'll tell it to you very quickly if I can. We thought when we got into Germany it was very cold, and we were not dressed for cold weather. And we came out of Hamburg toward Bremen one night in our car, and there was a pull-off there that said Parkplatz. And so we thought, okay, we'll pull up there and we'll sleep for the night in our car. So we rolled down the window just a little bit. We put a candle in there so that we could get a little bit of warmth in there. And I got in the back seat, and John was in the front seat. In the middle of the night, there is a tap on our glass. And we looked to see who it is, and somebody is outside the window of our car. And the next thing I noticed is a flashlight is held on a pistol. And the gun is aimed right at us, and they say, "Raus, raus, and schießen Sie." Get out of this car or we're going to shoot you. So we got out of the car, and they took us about, I'd say maybe 100 yards to where they had a truck parked that had a canvas over the back of it. The truck had run low on fuel, and they pulled in there, and they were escaped convicts from Hamburg prison, and they put us in the back of that truck, and they tied us up with our hands behind us and tied our hands to our feet. So we were doubled over this way. And the scariest part of that experience for me was they took my sock off and stuffed it in my mouth and then taped my mouth shut. And I felt like I was going to choke. You know, that was my biggest fear, is that I was going to choke. But when they were tying me, I had enough of the old Western films to know to keep my wrist like this. So I had them apart as far as I could. They tied as tight as they could. But as soon as they left, we heard them leave with our car. They got in our car and away they drove with our car. They stole our car, everything in it. All these slides you see here were in that car. I slipped out of that and I freed John, who was tied tight. And the first thing that we did, it was pitch black and cold as could be. We ran into the woods. You know, like, I don't know why we ran into the woods. I don't know where we thought we were going. And finally we realized we're gonna freeze out here. We have to go back to the freeway and try to catch a ride. Well, John, who knew German really well, heard them talk about coming back. They were going to Bremen to do some kind of a robbery of some sort, and they were gonna come back on that road. And they had said they were gonna stop. We thought they were gonna shoot us, but they apparently chose not to shoot us because a truck had pulled into the park plots and they didn't want the shot to be heard. So finally, John and I ran up to that trucker and John started talking in German as fast as he could, with ropes still hanging around his neck. And he said, "We've been robbed," and the guy thought, he said, "We're the robbers." So that was a miscommunication of rather serious consequences, because he then drove away. Away he went and left us out on the freeway. And so we went out on the freeway, but they're 2 o'clock in the morning, very seldom a car coming by, cold as could be, a t-shirt on and a pair of pants, and one sock.
One sock.
You know, and afraid that our car might in fact be coming back. So we stay in the bushes to the side until we're positive it's not our car. Then we jump out and wave our hands to try to stop the traffic. Well, nobody's going to stop a bunch of lunatics jumping out from behind a tree. And so during that period of time, sure enough, our car came back. We recognized it, we heard the motor, we knew that sound, and we had a broken taillight on the back. We got that in Aleppo. Somebody ran into us with a motorcycle. And anyway, we knew our car. It slowed down at the park plots, and then it continued on. At that point, we weren't afraid to get out and try to wave down. A trucker stopped for us. He was suspicious of us, but he said, "I'll take you to the next stop up here, and then you can call the police." So up to the stop we go, and we are almost like a mile away from this rest stop. And here's our car sitting on the side of the road, the lights on, the doors open, nobody around it. Nobody around it. And I thought, well, maybe we ought to stop, you know, and try to get our car. They had run out of fuel with our car. They caught a ride ahead of us, and they were at the rest stop when we got there. Both guys were sitting with a can of gas by their chair in a cafe with a cup of coffee, trying to talk a trucker into taking them back to our car. And we saw them there. I saw them immediately, and my crazy mentality of an American, I thought we caught him. That was my idea, we caught him. So I was going to grab this one guy like this, and I thought John was a lot bigger than me, you could tell that on there. I thought he would take care of the big guy, I would take care of the little guy. There were 2 guys. Well, I looked for John to see what he was doing. He was out the door. As fast as he was going, across the street to a service station. And the fella across the table reached into his pocket again for the gun. And at that point, I said, I got to follow John. I followed John. We called the police. These guys escaped out into the woods someplace. We got our car back and continued our journey. Never, that is not in any of my letters to my mother.